Hi, Tom Mills here, and this is today's session, today being May the 15th, and I had posted on the effectively blog posting, or the video posting, listing at the Bible Study Storehouse slash Bible Study TV, BibleStudyStorehouse.com/Bible Studies TV, that I would be putting out a session today, May 15th. And I was hoping to have had it live, but just the way timing has worked, I've needed to pre-record it beforehand. So this is pre-recorded midday on Sunday. And still working through some details on what this as a weekly or regular thing is going to look like. Still working on some details, and I'll be posting it on that page as soon as I have that figured out. But at this point, the date is probably going to move away from Sundays into a Monday evening or something like that, just simply because for my family, Sunday doesn't seem to be working well. But what I wanted to share on today was inspired by a conversation I had with a friend of mine a few days ago. And the conversation with this friend was about where he is at in the church that he's going to, or more correctly, where he had been going to, and how he feels it's important for he and his family to move on to somewhere else. And so we were having a conversation about where he's at in that process, and he's undecided where their next step is, but it was an opportunity to share in the conversation my understanding, and this is my understanding, of the nature of denominations. And really, the conversation with him came down to encouraging him to examine where the Lord wants him to go next. And I know that he's doing that, but really just to dig in. And I felt that in sharing with him some background on the nature of denominations would serve him in terms of his next steps. So that's what I thought I would share with you today. Because admittedly, it is something that I and my family are, or I guess more correctly, I'm looking at in terms of where I and my family are at, the church that we're currently at, and how we understand the Lord wants us to be there, or maybe calling us to move on or do something different, or I'm just not quite sure what exactly it looks like in the moment. And so I guess there's some of this going on for me as well, and you might be in a similar place. And so the encouragement would be, of course, to follow the Lord's leading in what He would have you do. Hearing God's voice, we've been learning these things for a long time. That's what I need to do. That's what I was encouraging my friend to do. And of course, that's what I would encourage you to do. But a bit of the background then that I shared with him is this understanding of where denominations have come from and how they have risen over time. And I was drawing for him the parallel back to the journey of the Israelites leaving Egypt. And he was familiar with some of this history, and I know that he was familiar with some of it, and that's partly why I felt comfortable in kind of going down this whole path and sharing this with him, because I knew that he'd kind of get it. So there's this parallel between the rise of denominations and the journey of Israel from Egypt and moving through to the Promised Land. And Dr. Stephen Jones has covered some of this material before. If you've read some of his material, then you're probably familiar with some of this. I guess for me, it's about the practical application. So we have the Israelites, and they're in Egypt. They're in slavery. And of course, Moses, the time of Moses, Passover, and they are called to leave Egypt. And so we have this Passover event that happens for the Israelites as they are called out and leave Egypt. And in a similar way, in history, we have this time of Luther, who, as many historians will know, started the Protestant Reformation and nailed his thesis of what he understood wasn't correct with the Roman Catholic Church at the time, nailed that on the door, and started, as I say, the Protestant Reformation. But really the revelation for Luther was salvation by faith. Salvation by faith. By faith in what? By faith in the blood of the Lamb. And of course, this is what connects Luther and the revelation of salvation by faith with Passover. They're both the same revelation. Luther looking backwards to salvation in faith in Jesus Christ as the blood of the Lamb, and Passover at the time in Egypt looking forward to the time when Christ would come and be that lamb that would be sacrificed in Passover in the Roman era. One's looking backwards, one's looking forward, but in kind of a type and shadow arrangement or a parallel, they're both connected in that way. So that's where the parallel starts. Egypt, Passover, the Israelites leave, they escape their bondage, and they start moving forward. The Luther starts this process, and there is a release of bondage for many people as they got a revelation of that, followed Luther, and left the Roman Catholic Church. Well, so then time goes on in both of these, and for the Israelites, they of course go through the Red Sea and come out the other side. And we know that Paul refers to that as their baptism. And so in somewhat similar, we find that another denomination or another revelation springs up around baptism, and I believe the Anabaptists of the time that comes as a revelation after Luther. And they get this revelation of the necessity of baptism to show one's faith by being immersed in baptism. Of course, that is in counterpoint or in response to Luther's or even the Catholics' understanding of sprinkling and baptism by water on the head. They felt that was important. So we have the Baptists that get this revelation that it's important to be immersed in baptism. And so in somewhat similar way, we have the Israelites that are kind of immersed in the Red Sea. And so we have that parallel there. We go on a bit further. Of course, the Israelites are going to come to Mount Sinai. And at Mount Sinai, that will be then celebrated as the Feast of Weeks, which we know will later become the Feast of Pentecost. The Feast of Weeks being 7 weeks, 49 days, plus 1 day is 50. That's Penta, becomes Pentecost in the book of Acts. And so we have the Israelites that have gone, they've left at Passover, they've left Egypt and that bondage in Egypt, they've left it, salvation through faith in the blood of the Lamb, that's Passover. They go through the Red Sea, and then they find their way at Mount Sinai at Feast of Weeks. And of course there they get the revelation that God speaks. God comes on the mountain and speaks to the people, maybe more clearly attempts to speak to the people. We read in there that when God speaks to them, most of the people said, Moses, you please, you hear whatever God has to say. We don't want to hear God's voice. It's going to kill us. We just don't want to hear. And so Moses, you go and speak to God. But nonetheless, the process in there is that God came to speak. Whether or not the people heard or not, was their thing. God comes to speak. That was the revelation then. And so then on the denominational side of things, again, we have the Catholic Church as this sense of bondage. We have Luther, salvation by faith, the Lutheran Church. We go further. We get the Anabaptist Church, the revelation of baptism. We come further when we come to this understanding that the Pentecostal Church understood of that God speaks. And so a denomination is born out of that. And from there, we know that for the Israelites, the journey went forward. And we know that the Israelites went on to go towards the Promised Land. We know the story of sending in the spies. And we know that in the end, as we look at the feast days that came out of that, of course, the sending in the spies, they chose not to go into the Promised Land at that time, and they wandered around the wilderness for 40 years and eventually ended up in the Promised Land. we know that in that whole story of the journeys of the Israelites from Egypt to the Promised Land, that sets out for us a process of revelation and spiritual growth. Right from complete captivity in Egypt to the Promised Land. And my understanding of the Promised Land is that time when we come and we have our land, our bodies, completely restored to us, no longer being mortal. And that the fulfillment of our Promised Land in that way. That's my understanding. As I understand, we're not there yet. I don't know of anyone that has stepped into their immortal body yet, or at the very least, we certainly haven't done that as a people, as a whole group of people. But it does lay out for us this path of revelation, all the way from captivity to absolute salvation, redemption, the glorification of our bodies. So, going back to the denominations, we have this, what we can see as denominations, and that these denominations have picked up on these revelation all the way through the process. The Lutheran Church, the Anabaptists, I believe those denominations are Missionary Alliance, those kinds of denominations, through to Pentecostal denominations. And then there are other denominations that have sought to gain understanding or revelation beyond that. Of course, part of this whole process and this journey that we're looking at is that the Israelites were told in their journey to follow the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. They were instructed to keep moving, that they were instructed to not stay in one place. If the cloud or the pillar moved on, they were instructed to move on. And so they did. And to use that wilderness parallel, of course, if a whole group of people move on and they leave you in the middle of the wilderness, chances are you're going to die. It's not a place to stay all by yourself. It's not a place certainly to set up camp and stay permanently. The Israelites lived in tents. It was meant to be mobile. It wasn't about setting up something permanent. And yet, so often, denominationally, we set up these permanent houses. We set up these permanent buildings. We set up these permanent doctrines or statements of faith. And we find it very difficult to move on. And so, in speaking with this friend of mine, I was just simply sharing this parallel and this understanding. And noting to him that at this point, Father has pulled them out of where they currently are, and there's an opportunity to move. And almost like that pillar by day, that cloud by day, pillar by night, almost like that opportunity to, you've heard the calling that you need to be doing something different. Now, where to go next? And so I'd share that with you. It even brought me back to a place to rethink upon this principle that I've understood for many years. And as I say, we're currently in a church that we have been enjoying, that has been serving us, has been serving especially my daughter. And yet, I need to look at and say, Father, where do you have us at in our journey? Where do you have me at personally in my journey? What do you want us to be doing in terms of my personal growth, the growth for my family? How am I supposed to best follow the cloud in this path of spiritual growth? So I share that with you, and something to think about. And as I said, I'd even encourage you, because you may be finding yourself at this place where you might be feeling stuck in a denomination, or you might be feeling like indeed you're being called out. Whatever the case is, and certainly no judgment in wherever the Lord has you at. But the encouragement to you and to myself is to seek what Father would have us do. And where is that cloud going to be willing to follow it. And it might get uncomfortable. And I know probably a number of us have already been in an uncomfortable place, but it might get even more uncomfortable, or just whatever it's going to look like to have the courage and the hearing to follow it through. I hope to have something next week. Again, I'm not quite sure what it's going to look like. I'm still praying about what Father wants this thing to look like and how it's going to come together. But I do intend to have something next week, and so I look forward to catching up with you then. Of course, I'm posting these at BibleStudyStorehouse.com/BibleStudyTV. That's where you can find this and past episode. That's BibleStudyStorehouse.com/BibleStudyTV, and we'll catch you later.